Hello, this is Algebra 1, Notes 8-6, Factoring Trinomials where the leading coefficient does not equal 1. So A does not equal 1. Let's do two review problems. You can either do them by yourself, so pause the video, and then when you're done with them, you can unpause the video to check your work, or you can work with me. So when we're factoring, first step, is it in standard form? Yes, this is in standard form. Second step, can I take out a greatest common factor? And here I cannot. And then third step is how many terms are there? There are 3 terms and our leading coefficient is 1. So this is a double bubble problem, meaning we're going to have 2 pairs of parentheses with an x in each one, and we're looking for 2 numbers that multiply to get 20 and add to get -9. So let's make a list. 2 numbers that multiply to get a positive, add to get a negative, have to both be negative. So -1 and -20 multiply to get 20. -2 and -10 multiply to get +20. -4 and -5 multiply to get 20. Out of those choices, the -4 and -5 add to get that middle term, -9. So that's our choice that we want, our final answer, put in the -4 and -5. That's our answer. You could either write it like that, or you could write it as x minus 5 term first and then x minus 4. Both are correct. Now remember, in this class you must check your work. So that is required in all of our algebra and geometry classes. So to check your work, you write the word check, and then you are going to rewrite the expression, x, the factored expression, and multiply it out. So we'll distribute twice. We'll distribute the x to both terms of the second pair of parentheses, and then we'll distribute the -4. So x times x is x squared, x times -5 is -5x, -4 times x is -4x, -4 times -5 is +20. Now we'll add like terms, so our final answer here is x squared minus 9x plus 20. Check, we got that right. So our final answer is what I circled in red as well as what I circled in blue. Review problem number 2, factor. First step, is it in standard form? Yes, it is. Second question, can I take out a greatest common factor? No, we can't. So third question is how many terms are there? There are 4, so we're going to be factoring by grouping. Group the first 2 terms and then group the last 2 terms. So in the first 2 terms, the blue terms, we're going to take out a greatest common factor. So that would be a 6x squared. So we are left with 6 times 2 gives us 12. I need 3 x's, and I took 2 out, so I have 1 left I need. Minus 6 times -3 gives us -18, and I already took out the x squared. Now we're going to have our plus, and then 2x minus 3, there is no common factor, so we're going to take out a 1. You have to take out something, and so we'll take out a 1. And now we're ready to factor out. We have a binomial. Factor out their greatest common factor, which is the stuff. This is, we said in our other notes in 8-8 that I call this the stuff. It's the same thing. You would just factor out the stuff from both of them. Or in other words, let's just take out the greatest common factor, which is 2x minus 3. And we're left with, in the first term, a 6x squared. And in the second term, we're left with a +1. That is our answer. I'll circle it in red pen. It is required that you do a check. So you write out the word check, and then you are going to rewrite it and go ahead and distribute twice. So we have our 2x minus 3 times the quantity 6x squared plus 1. We'll distribute by the 2x first, and then we'll distribute by the -3. So distributing by the 2x times 6x squared is a 12x cubed. 2x times 1 is plus 2x. Then distributing by the -3, -18x squared, and -3 times 1 is -3. Add like terms. There are no like terms, so we are going to just put it in standard form. So 12x cubed minus 18x squared plus 2x minus 3, and that is what we started with. So check, we did it right. Okay, today we are going to be doing crisscross split the middle term, one of my favorite lessons of all times. This is 8-6. Now there are a lot of different ways to factor when your leading coefficient is not 1. This is the easiest way that I find most students find doable after all of my years of teaching. So let's go through the steps. So for factoring split the middle, or in other words, crisscross split the middle term, put the expression in standard form, take out the greatest common factor, multiply a times c. So here's your standard form. You're going to multiply first and last term, and you're finding two numbers that multiply to get that product, and then add to get this middle term of b. And then we'll factor by grouping. This may seem confusing, but we'll go through a lot of examples step by step. It's really helpful to have your factoring steps worksheet out available all the time when you are doing these factoring problems. Let's review. First step, put the expression in standard form. Second step, factor out the greatest common factor. Then determine how many terms there are. We have not done 2 terms yet. We have done 3 terms where the leading coefficient is 1, that's your double bubble. And we have done 4 terms where we're grouping the first 2 and grouping the last 2. We are going to be doing crisscross split the middle term today, and this is section 8-6. Example 1, factor. First step of factoring. Is it in standard form? Yes. Second step of factoring. Can I take out a greatest common factor? I cannot. Third step of factoring. How many terms are there? There are 3, and the leading coefficient is 5. It is not 1. So since it is 5, we're going to do crisscross split the middle term. So put a big crisscross. In the top part, put a multiplication, and on the bottom, put a plus. What we are going to do is we are going to multiply the first and the last term. So 5x squared times 2 will go up here as the 10x squared. In the middle, we have a positive 11x. That goes down here. So the first and last are the product of a times c. Now this is just like ax squared plus bx plus c. The product of a times c goes up here, and the b value with the x goes down here. We're looking for 2 numbers that multiply to get 10 and add to get 11. So we're looking at factors of 10. Now factors of 10, they have to add to get 11. 1 and 10 or 2 and 5, they have to both be positive because they have to add to get positive 11. The product will be 10 and they add to get 11. So we'll have a 1x and a 10x. Or you can put 10x first and then 1x. I'll show you that you can do either order. Okay, so now this is called crisscross split the middle term. We have just done the crisscross part. We multiplied the first and last, that was the 10x squared, and the middle term is 11x. The 2 numbers or values that multiply to get 10x squared are 1x and 10x. They multiply to get 10x squared, and they add to get 11x. So this is called crisscross split the middle term because we've done crisscross, and now we're going to split the middle term. We're going to take our first expression, 5x squared, but instead of plus 11x, we're going to replace that with 1x plus 10x. So whatever's in the rectangle gets replaced with the other thing inside the rectangle, and then plus 2. So we've just done the split the middle term. This is called crisscross split the middle term. We've just split the middle term. You should now recognize we have 4 terms. So we're going to factor by grouping. Group the first 2 and group the last 2. So the first 2, I can take out an x, and I'm left with a 5x plus 1. The second grouping, I can take out a 2, and I'm left with a 5x plus 1. Note that we have the same expression inside parentheses. So we have a binomial, and in this binomial, we are going to factor out the greatest common factor, and that is the quantity 5x plus 1. So in the first term, we're left with an x, and in the second term, we're left with a 2. That is our answer. I'll circle it in red pen. Because we're in algebra, all algebra and geometry students are required to do a check. So write the word check and rewrite our answer. Our answer is our factored form, 5x plus 1 times the quantity x plus 2. And distribute. So we're going to multiply by the 5x in both pieces of the second parentheses, and we'll multiply by the 1. So we have a 5x squared plus 10, and then we have a plus 1x plus 2. Add like terms, we have a 5x squared plus 11x plus 2, and that checks. That's what we started with. Our final answer is, of course, the factored answer. Okay, before we go to example 2, I want to address something in example 1. What if in our original crisscross split the middle term, what if instead of putting the 1x and then the 10x, what if I switched those? So I'm going to erase the 1x and I'm going to put in a 10x there. And instead of the 10x on the right side, I'm going to erase that and put a 1x. And I'm going to show you it does not matter the order if you put in your terms in a different order. So let's go ahead and we just did the crisscross. Let's split the middle term. So we have a 5x squared, and we're going to replace what's in the rectangle. So instead of 11x, we're going to say plus 10x plus 1x plus 2. So on your sheet of paper, I have just switched the middle two terms. I'm going to show you that we get the same final factors. They're going to be in different order, but it will be the same factors. So we'll group the first two. So I will take out what's in common. That's a 5x. We're left with an x plus 2. In this second grouping, I don't have any common factors, so we are going to take out a 1. You have to take out something, and if there are no greatest common factor, just take out the 1. And now we can recognize that we have the same stuff inside the parentheses. So our greatest common factor on this binomial is x plus 2. So we'll take out the x plus 2, factor that out, and in the first term we're left with a 5x, and in the second term we're left with a 1. Note that this is the same answer as what we had before, it's just in a different order. So our factors are the same, they're just in a different order, both are correct. So when you are checking your work with our solutions, it's okay if you have it in a different order. Okay, here's our second crisscross but the middle term problem. So let's go through the steps. First of all, factor. Is it in standard form? Yes, it is. Second question, can I take out a greatest common factor? No. Third question, it's a trinomial, 3 terms, and the leading coefficient is 6. It is not 1, so I cannot do double bubble. I will have to do a crisscross but the middle term. So we put in a big crisscross. In the top, you must put your multiplication, and the bottom you put your plus. Then you are going to multiply the first and last term. Please put like this little blue thing. It doesn't matter what color it is, but it'll help you remember you're multiplying the a term, the ax squared term, and the c term. So you're multiplying the a term, ax squared term with the c. I don't usually write down a and c or b down here, but if that helps you remember, that's great. So this is of the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So a x squared times c. So that is a 30x squared. Then the middle term is positive 13x, so we'll put that down here, 13x. Now again, normally I will not put down the a, the b, and the c, so I'm just going to erase that, but if that's helpful for you, please write that down. We are now looking at factors of 30, and they have to add to get 13. So factors of 30 would be like, two numbers that multiply to get 30, add to get a positive, positive. So 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, 3 and 10 work, 5 and 6 also, but they have to add to get the 13x, so 3 and 10. So we'll write this as 3x and 10x, or you can write it as 10x and 3x, it does not matter, but I put a rectangle around it. We are now ready to split the middle term. Again, this is called criss-cross split the middle term. So I am going to rewrite the initial expression. I have a 6x squared plus 13x, but instead of using what's inside the original rectangle, let's replace that with 3x plus 10x, what's in our new rectangle. And then we still have the plus 5 in the original expression. Now we have a 4 terms, so we're going to group the first 2 terms, and then we're going to group the second 2 terms. In the first 2 terms, factor out the greatest common factor. That is a 3x. We're left with a 2x plus 1 inside the parentheses, so if you multiply that out, you would get 6x squared plus 3x. Then we have plus, I'm going to factor out what's in common in the next 2 terms. That is a 5, and we're left with a 2x plus 1. Now, I have a binomial, and I'm going to factor out the greatest common factor of the binomial. The greatest common factor is the stuff, the 2x plus 1. So I am left with, in the first term, a 3x, and in the second term, we're left with a 5. This is our answer. We have just factored our trinomial. We must check our work because that is required in our algebra and geometry classes. So to check, go ahead and rewrite what our answer is, the 2 factors. And again, the 2 factors can be in either order. You could write it as 3x plus 5 first, or you could write it as the 2x plus 1 first. Both are correct, so I'm going to circle both just as a reminder. It does not matter the order of the factors. Now, what's inside the factors, that order matters. So I'm going to distribute the 2x first, and then we'll distribute the 1. So distributing the 2x, 2x times 3x is 6x squared, 2x times 5 is plus 10x. Then we'll distribute the 1, so plus 3x, and 1 times 5 is 5. Add like terms, and we are left with a 6x squared plus 10x plus 3x is plus 13x plus 5. Check. Yes, that's exactly what we started with. Example 3, factor. First step of factoring, is it in standard form? Yes. Second step of factoring, can I take out a greatest common factor? I can't in this one. Third step, how many terms are there? There are 3 terms, and the leading coefficient is 5. Since it is not 1, the leading coefficient is 5, I'm going to do criss-cross split the middle term. I'm going to put my big crisscross. I'm going to have a multiplication sign on the top part, and I'll put a plus sign on the bottom part. I am now going to multiply the first term and the last term, or in other words, I'm multiplying the ax squared times the c. So I have a negative 20x squared, and then the middle term, I'm going to put a rectangle around it, and that goes in the bottom. What we are now looking for are 2 numbers that multiply to get negative 20 and add to get 19. So we want multiply to get a negative and add to get a positive. And that would be, let's see, we have, that means one has to be negative, one has to be positive. Negative 1 and 20, 1 and negative 20, negative 2, and well, you know what? I'm going to stop right now because I already found my pair. The pair that multiplies to get negative 20 and adds to get a positive 19 is negative 1 and 20. Now, we have a question. We can either put a negative 1x first, or we can put the negative 1x second. I will tell you right now that it is easiest when you have only one negative term to put the negative at first. We'll get to the reason why this is easier. But again, it does not matter if you put the 20x first or the negative 1x first, but I will tell you that if you do put the negative first, it will be a little easier for factoring. Okay, we've just done the crisscross. Let's now split the middle term. So I rewrite our original expression, the 5x squared plus 19x minus 4, but I'm going to replace that middle term. What's inside the rectangle gets replaced with what's inside the rectangle with our crisscross. So instead of 19x, we're going to put minus 1x plus 20x and then minus 4. Recognize that we have 4 terms. We're going to group the first 2 and group the second 2. So we'll factor out a greatest common factor from the first 2 terms. which is an x. X times the quantity, 5x minus 1. And of the second term, we can factor out a 4. So 4 times the quantity, 5x minus 1. We have a binomial, and both of them have a 5x minus 1 term. So in this binomial, let's factor out the greatest common factor. That is a 5x minus 1. And we're left with an x from the first term and a 4 from the second term. That is our answer. I'm going to circle it in red pen. Now we must check our answer because that is required for all factoring problems in algebra and in geometry. So then when you get into Algebra 2, you're ready to rock and roll with factoring. So now let's go ahead and multiply. We're going to distribute the 5x and then we'll distribute the negative 1. So 5x times x is 5x squared. 5x times 4 is plus 20x. Then distribute the negative 1, negative 1x, and negative 1 times 4 is negative 4. Add like terms, and we get a 5x squared plus 19x minus 4. Check, that is what we started with. Example 4, factor. First step for factoring. Is it in standard form? Yes, it is. Second step, can I take out a greatest common factor? No, not in this problem. Number 3, how many steps are there, or how many terms are there? There are 3 terms. And because there are 3 terms, I'm looking at the leading coefficient. It is 3. Since it is not 1, I can't do double bubble. Since the leading coefficient is not 1, I'm going to do my crisscross. So I'm going to put a multiplication sign on top, plus on the bottom. I am looking to multiply the first and last term. That goes in the multiplication. I'm multiplying them. So I get negative 45x squared. And the middle term, I'm going to put a rectangle around, and that is a 4x. I am looking for 2 numbers whose product is negative 45, and they add to get positive 4. So since the product is negative 45, one has to be negative, one has to be positive. So for instance, like negative 9 and 5, or 9 and negative 5. And the sum of it has to be positive 4. So we're looking for 9 and negative 5. They multiply to get negative 45, add to get positive 4. Now remember in the previous problem I said when you have one of the terms being negative, put that in front. So I'm going to put that first, negative 5x, and then I'll put the 9x. Now let's just double check. When I multiply those 2 numbers, I get the negative 45x squared. When I add them, I get positive 4x. So I've done the crisscross correctly. Now we're ready to split the middle term. So I'm going to go back to my original factor expression, 3x squared plus 4x minus 15. But I'm going to replace the 4x with what's inside the new rectangle. That's negative 5x plus 9x. And in the original expression, we still had that minus 15. So we've just split the middle term. So we are going to factor the first 2 terms, and we're going to factor the second 2 terms. In the first 2 terms, I'm going to factor out an x, and I'm left with a 3x minus 5. In the second term, I have I can take out a 3. So I take out a 3. 3 times 3x will give me 9x, and 3 times negative 5 will give me negative 15. And in both parentheses, we have the same expression, which is good. We now have a binomial. We have an x times stuff plus 3 times stuff. So the greatest common factor is what's inside the parentheses, 3x minus 5. And what's left is an x, and then plus 3. So this is our answer. I'll circle it in red pen. And then we must do a check because we are in algebra class. So every factoring problem, do a check. Rewrite your original expression, meaning our final answer, our factored expression. And then we'll distribute the 3x to both terms of the second pair of parentheses and distribute the negative 5 to both pieces of the second expression. And so we have our 3x times x is 3x squared plus 3x times 3 is 9x minus 5x minus 15. Adding like terms, we get 3x squared plus 4x minus 15. If you are feeling good about this, you are in a very good position. The last two problems, we're going to factor out a greatest common factor first. Then we'll do the crisscross split the middle term. Number 5, factor. First step, is it in standard form? Yes. Second step, can I take out a greatest common factor? I can. I'm going to take out a 2. So I'm left with 2 times the quantity x squared. 2 times negative 3x will give us that 6x, and 2 times 2 will give us the 4. Okay, so now I'm looking inside parentheses. Whoa, this is a trinomial, but the leading coefficient is 1. This is a lovely problem because it's not a crisscross split the middle term. The leading coefficient is 1, so this is double bubble, or in other words, I have 2 pairs of parentheses, both with an x in it. Remember to put your 2 in front of both of those parentheses. We're now looking for two numbers that multiply to get positive 2, add to get negative 3. So numbers that multiply to get 2, 1 and 2, or negative 1 and negative 2. Which pair adds to get negative 3? That would be the negative 1 and negative 2. So I'll put the negative 1 first, then the negative 2, but you could have also changed the order. This is my answer. Go ahead and write down check because it is required that you write a check. So rewrite this expression, and then you can only multiply 2 items at a time. I recommend students to do the distribution first with the pairs of parentheses, and then we'll multiply by the 2. So we have 2 times the quantity. We have an x squared minus 2x, and then distributing the negative 1 minus 1x plus 2. Add like terms inside the parentheses first. So we have an x squared minus 3x plus 2, and then finally we'll distribute by the 2 to get our final check. So 2x squared minus 6x plus 4, check, that's exactly what we started with. Last problem, factor. First step, is it in standard form? Yes, it is. Second step, can we take out a greatest common factor? Yes, we can. We can take out a 3. So 3 times 6x squared will give us 18x squared. 3 times a negative 11x will give us a negative 33x. And 3 times 4 will give us 12. Now we see what's inside the parentheses. It's a trinomial, and the leading coefficient is 6. It is not 1, so I cannot do the double bubble. I have to do a crisscross split the middle term. But we're going to do the crisscross split the middle term with our inside factor, meaning I'm going to multiply 6 times 4. So 6x squared times 4 is 24x squared. A real common mistake that students will make is they'll multiply their original 18x squared times 12. Don't do that. It'll create big numbers, and it's going to cause you problems later on because you won't have factored it completely. So we're going to multiply 6x squared times 4. That is our 24x squared. And then the middle term, I'll just put a rectangle around it, and this is a negative 11x. We are now looking for two numbers that multiply to get 24, but they have to add to get a negative. So we're looking for factors that are negative. So like negative 1 and negative 24, negative 2 and negative 12, negative 3 and negative 8, negative 4 and negative 6. Those all are pairs that multiply to get positive 24, and they add to get a negative. The pair we want is the negative 3 and negative 8. Here we have two negatives, so it does not matter which order you put this in. You can put the negative 3x first or the negative 8x, and then put a rectangle around it. I am going to save some space here, so I'm going to erase my factors just so I can keep writing below. And so I have just done my crisscross. Now I can split the middle term. You must keep the 3 outside of the parentheses. Now we are going to replace the negative 11x with what's inside the rectangle on our crisscross. So we have a 6x squared minus 3x minus 8x and then plus 4. Just keep the 3 out in front. Don't worry about that confusing you. What we are going to do is just do our normal steps of factor the first 2 terms and then factor the second 2 terms. So the first 2 terms take out a 3x and we're left with a 2x minus 1. In our second term, you must take out a negative. Remember, all leading coefficients inside parentheses must be positive. So I'm going to take out a negative 2 and I'm left with a positive, no, I'm going to take out a negative 4 is the greatest common factor, and I'm left with a 2x minus 1. So the leading coefficient has to be positive 2, positive. And now we have both terms that are positive, are the same, 2x minus 1. So I have a 3. I'm going to take out greatest common factor, 2x minus 1, and we're left with a 3x minus 4. That is my answer. I will circle it. I'll circle it in red pen, and then we do a check. So we write down check. We write it all the way. So 3 times the quantity, 2x minus 1, and then times 3x minus 4. You can only multiply 2 items at a time, so make sure that you are multiplying the parentheses first. That's what I would recommend. So distribute the 2x first, and then we will distribute the negative 1. Keep the 3 out in front the whole time. So we are left with, inside our parentheses, 2x times 3x is 6x squared. 2x times negative 4 is negative 8x. And then negative 1 times 3x is negative 3x, and negative 1 times negative 4 is plus 4. And now we'll simplify inside parentheses first. So we have adding like terms, 6x squared. And negative 8x minus 3x is negative 11x. And then plus 4, and then finally distribute that 3 to each piece, and we get a 18x squared minus 3 times 11 is 33x plus 12. Look back on your original expression, 18x squared minus 33x plus 12. That is correct. Congratulations by getting through this Criss-Cross split the middle term lesson notes. If you want additional resources for factoring, please go ahead and click here in your notes. And remember that your Delta Math assignment for 8-6 is due on Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on which class you're in. If you have any questions, please email your teacher. And so we are welcome and happy to help you out with any questions you have, whether it's in email or we can set up a Google Meet with you. We want you to be happy, learn a lot. This is tough stuff, but it's also fun stuff. So hopefully you guys had a little fun, and if you are confused, look back on these notes and try some problems out, and if you're still confused, go ahead and email us.